Live.
Okay, welcome folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. It is Friday the 13th. And we've got some work this morning. We're not sure if we're going to be meeting this afternoon or not. We'll see how it plays out. And we're starting this morning with Rachel Seelig is here from the Vermont Legal Aid. And Legal Aid has reached out to all the chairs, just wanting to do a brief overview of their organization and just to connect with all the committees. So Rachel, welcome.
Thank you.
And if you could introduce yourself for the record, and I know you're passing out a document here.
So for the record, my name is Rachel Seelig. I am the director of the Disability Law Project for Vermont Legal Aid and also our staff attorney for government relations. So I'll be in the State House on behalf of Legal Aid quite a bit this session. The reason that we wanted to reach out to meet with all the committees, even this one where you might be like, why does Vermont Legal Aid want to come to institutions, is because you have a big job. You have all of the work that you're trying to do in this committee and the policies you're trying to write to make the state of Vermont a better place for Vermonters. And then you also have constituents calling you and in need of help. And that's where we can come in and be helpful to you in providing constituent service. And I'm really familiar with constituent service because I spent about 2.5 years working for Congressman Welch doing constituent service work. But you don't all get constituent service staff. So what I wanted to do was first pass out this information sheet, and this describes our 11 different projects at Vermont Legal Aid. I'm not going to go through all of them, but what I will say is we're the largest civil legal aid provider in the state of Vermont, and we receive now about 20,000 calls a year, which is double what we used to receive before the pandemic. And we can help people in a lot of different areas. So a lot of people think of us as, oh, that's only for low-income Vermonters. But that's actually not true. We do have some projects that are income restricted, but a lot of our projects, our seniors project, my project that assists people with disability-related legal needs, our healthcare hotline, the Healthcare Advocates Office, is not income restricted. Our long-term care ombudsman, the Vermont Ombudsman Project, can assist anyone who's in a nursing home or receiving home and community-based long-term services. And so there are a lot of things where you may be getting calls from constituents, and you have a couple options. One is you can call the commissioner or the division director for whichever part of state government they're having trouble with, but you can also call us. Because we can help them navigate that process and look for other solutions to get the care or the assistance that they need, rather than just kind of the one thing that they're sure of, or one thing that they're knowing to ask for, rather. So over the course of this session, as that happens, what I would encourage you to do is find me or Mike Fisher, who couldn't be here this morning, and either of us will help you get that constituent to the part of Vermont Legal Aid to assist them. So you have all of our contact information on this sheet, but you don't really need to worry about what part of Vermont Legal Aid can help them. It's our job to triage that and figure that out and get them to the help that they need. And so that's really why we're here, is to say we want to be helpful. And if there are issues that you're tackling where it would be helpful for us to come in, we're happy to do that. But really, we wanted to come and talk with everyone about Vermont Legal Aid as a way of helping your constituents. So that's my real quick description, and I'm happy to answer questions that you all have.
Great. First off, hang on, Gina.
Yeah.
I think this is really helpful.
Great. I'm
This
so
is
glad.
very, very helpful. And I do want to say that I did reach out on behalf of someone in Springfield on for the Healthcare Advocate Project. And I'll tell you, they went to the max.
Yes.
And they really helped this person. There were issues with the supplier for supplies.
Yep.
There were issues trying to get through even to the insurance company.
Yep.
And they really busted some chops. And they got it taken care of within a day or two. And I was really impressed, as this person was too. So
I'm so glad.
I would really encourage folks to reach out to these individual projects that they have, because it really helped break the log jam that was occurring for them.
Our systems are hard to navigate. I mean, that's just the reality. It would be great if they were easier. They're not.
Yeah.
And so we're here to help.
So Gina and then Eric.
Yeah.
So I have a constituent actually that got a hold of me yesterday that's on fuel assistance. And he's leaving the place that the landlord, he's leaving the place that he's in to move in somewhere else.
And he wants
got a bunch
the assistants to follow him.
Well, no, he got a bunch of heating oil delivered at the lower rate.
Oh, okay.
And he's wondering if it's on the landlord to reimburse him or what. And I was like, it's probably really hard to figure out exactly how many gallons were put in, how many you used.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there's anything you could think of.
It's not my area of expertise, but this is kind of my point, is we have people who do know the LIHEAP program well and can try and help him figure that out.
So why don't you two hook up after the?
You've got my email address. I'm the very top one on the sheet on purpose.
Okay.
So send me an email and we'll connect him up with the right person to try and answer his questions.
Awesome.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Eric?
Does Vermont Legal Aid provide what they call like the, and I don't think there's too many of them around anymore, but they were called source providers. Do you know what I'm speaking of when I say that?
No.
They helped individuals navigate like the SSDI or.
Okay. Yeah. So we do some SSI and SSDI work.
Yeah.
We don't help people with their initial applications, but if they've been told they have an overpayment or they're no longer disabled and so they're going to lose their benefit, those are definitely things that we can help with. And we can provide what we call quick advice about other Social Security related issues. So yes, we can be a resource on Social Security, but I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what those programs provided, so I don't know if that's something we've absorbed or not.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Chip and then Tristan.
So I'm working on a just cause eviction bill again
Yes.
this year. So I think we met Mike Fisher in the past when we did that. So I'm just looking forward to working with your housing folks
Great.
in connection with that.
So I'll be in the building for housing, and Jean Murray, who runs our housing
Yeah,
for
I know Jean,
Vermont
yeah.
project, she'll be in the building.
Okay, great.
Housing.
Yeah, well, I'll look you up.
So we look forward to talking with you more about.
Okay, great.
And I think the perception that people have about legal aid, legal aid only represents folks who are very low income. And that's really
that's
not,
not accurate.
that's not accurate.
Yeah.
That's not accurate. It's to really help folks work through the system,
Yeah.
regardless of your income. It's really to help folks work through the system. Tristan?
Yeah, thank you, Director. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know these things. And I know I do know constituents have confusion. So a couple basic things if you could help me with so I can just be more informed and help them. And then I might have missed this. What is your budget?
No, they didn't go into that.
Okay.
So we have a pretty diversified budget at this point. So we get federal grants and then you, the legislature, provide support for us. And we will be asking for an increase in our budget this year from you. I know that's
Not this committee,
not your
it's
committee.
appropriations.
Great.
It's appropriations, but if you can support that, we certainly would appreciate it because right now we get a little bit less than $2.5 million from the AHS for our work. And that's been pretty level for 5 or 6 years now. We've got an increase last year. And then of course, inflation sucked all of that up. And when we've doubled how many people we're trying to help with fewer and fewer staff, that's why we'll be asking for some more this year. And we hope you'll be able to vote for that if it comes up. So,
Thank you. And what do you get from federal plus other sources?
So overall, we're about a $10 million budget at this point.
Do you mind if I ask another
Sure.
question? Do you I have a question? Do you have, I did see in here corrections, and we mentioned like you're coming in the.
Yeah.
So maybe help me understand for folks that are incarcerated and might have issues with the DOC.
Yep.
Where do they go?
So they go to the prisoner's rights office within the public defender's office. And what I can say is we do work with prisoners' rights. If they have someone that they're working with who has a disability related issue, they'll reach out to us. My project also includes what's called the Client Assistance Program, which helps people who are resolving problems with what's now called Hireability Vermont, but what used to be called Voc Rehab. And so if someone is getting ready to transition out and they need help connecting with Voc Rehab staff, they can get assistance addressing barriers to employment because of disability, we can help with that. And we've had some cases for folks, I'm mostly speaking about my project because that's what I know best and most about. We've certainly had folks who have had kind of disability related problems while they're still in prison, that, you know, deaf folks who need access to hearing aids or to ASL interpretation, that sort of thing. We've been able with those. And then more broadly, we do still have, we've lost most of our funding to do expungements for folks once they're out, but we do still have one attorney who's doing some of that work for expungible crimes once they're eligible. So that's probably the ways that we're most connected to corrections. But we have a good relationship with prisoners' rights, so that when they need us, they know to call.
That's under our Defender General,
Right, prisoners' rights.
Matt Valerio.
Yeah.
He's the governor's appointment. Yeah, we have prisoners' rights in here,
Yes.
and the Defender General quite often.
Got it. One more question, and one of the ways I hear about legal aid is sometimes in the negative. Just last week, a constituent who has a squatter, and then they say, oh, and then now they're upset that the squatter is not being helped by legal aid and they're paying taxes to this service, and I, you know, tenants' rights are very important. I was just curious if you have any process for sort of seeking just like justice or mediation in these cases.
Yes, so there is actually currently a mediation program that we participate in that was set up with the Vermont Landlords Association, which was run by Angela Lakowski, using some of the federal dollars that came in because of the pandemic to try and do mediation to resolve landlord-tenant disputes. So that certainly exists. And then one of the things that we were just talking yesterday with Housing in General about is this idea of an eviction diversion and rent rescue program, so that we can make sure that folks learn about a mediation program, or if the issue is they've fallen behind on rent, usually it's less than $2,000 that we're talking about. So if we can fund that and get people caught back up on rent, then their landlord is getting the rent, which is what the landlord means, and that person maintains housing stability. So we definitely do have some ideas and some options.
Thank you, Director.
So this is a great resource, and if you do have some constituent issues that are percolating out there, Rachel's
reach
here,
out.
just reach
I'm
out
here.
to her.
That's what we're here for.
We can do that. Gina?
Oddly enough, I just sent you a message and it's rejecting it because it thinks my message is spam from my ledge email.
Oh, well, that's not good.
No. Yeah, I really gotta let
So
you know.
I will call our IT people as soon as I get out of here, but if I can get your email address,
Yeah, totally.
I will email you.
Yeah.
To try and get around that problem.
Awesome.
Anything else?
Anything else?
It's great, Rachel. Rachel, I do want to talk to you for a minute, so we can get out in the hall.
Yep. And it looks like you have some extras of these, and I will be talking to some other committees.
Yeah.
These are great
Here
to
they are.
have.
If you had, if
Wanna
you could
pass
hand
it?
out the extras, that would be great. So
Have one here and have one
everyone
at
else
home.
can.
Have it by your phone at home, wherever your phone is, if it's not in your
Yes.
pocket. I have a landline at home.
You do.
I don't want people to get my cell number. Speaking of that, have you got the contact sheet?
I'm gonna
Yeah, my
email
bad.
it to him.
There you go. And I've always
Can I do that?
run out of space.
It's okay, I know the end of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, okay, I will, as soon as we're done, I have one more committee to.
Have you heard back from anybody?
Okay, cool. And it's,
I don't remember
sorry.
seeing it on my email.
I got it. Check this out and say.
Tuesday at 4.
Thank you.
Rachel, just,
Okay, I'll go
Rachel.
back.
No, I just
Rachel.
figured I'd
Thank
let
you
you
for letting
know
me know.
so that it's.
I get so many
just
emails.
type the name into,
Check your-
ledge email over here,
Somebody else.
Huh?
over here.
Check your-
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't
Yeah,
check emails from today. I don't
I
have,
thought it came from.
I don't
Type the
have
name
time.
into, ledge email account and it'll come up,
Okay,
the right email
great.
address.
Thank you, Rachel. I just want to meet you out in the hallway for 1 minute. And Dan, why don't you get started here on our spreadsheet of BAA? Does that work?
I can do that.
Yeah, I'll be right back. I don't think I need to see the
Good morning,
Howdy, Dan.
Morning,
Good
man.
morning.
Dan
It's
Peterson
all right, it's me.
with the Joint Fiscal Office. And what I'm going to do this morning is walk you through the spreadsheet that pertains to capital budget adjustment for the state fiscal years 2022 and 2023. This was enacted, this was passed by the legislature and enacted last session. So this is the most recent capital bill. And then I think the goals are twofold with going through this. First is sort of get a sense of the structure of the spreadsheet. It's a little bit different because it's an adjustment, so there's a little bit more information. But it's, it's fairly straightforward. And then the other is there are a few items and odd things that we can sort of stop on, go through, because these are not necessarily specific projects, but the nature of how things are changed from year to year might come up again. For example, changing a source of funding from capital bill dollars to American Rescue Plan Act dollars. That probably won't come up again, but it's something that happened in most recent bills. So it's something that's useful to just be aware of. That way, if the governor's capital budget proposal throws in some information that you hadn't seen previously, in the last 2-year capital bill, then maybe going through this will help understand that better. I do have the language in front of me. I'm not planning to walk through it, but I will. There are some things there's some areas where things were changed, where I'll probably call out and just say, in order to fully understand this, you probably want to look at the language. And I think Becky will probably be in here. Becky Wasserman will probably be in here at some point to go through that. But so with that said, I will begin. So the first prominent thing I want to point out here is column 3, or columns 2 and 3. So column 2 is something you'd be familiar with, where I said, this is where, at least in the last 2-year capital bill, I tie the spreadsheet to the underlying legislation. That's the same in column 3, but just to help keep track of everything, if there's a section number in column 3, that means something changed, or something is different from the 2-year capital bill. So this is something that pertains specifically to the budget adjustment. These are the things these are the areas where I will stop and give some extra detail. So the first is line 3, statewide major maintenance. This was, if you go over, actually, sorry, I skipped something. Columns 8, 9, and 10 are pertain to the capital budget adjustment. I believe it was Act 180. It's shown here as H739. So I'm going to spend most of my time in these columns, at least when I go through the numbers. So statewide major maintenance. If you go to column 9, FY23, if you'll notice that this number 7,096,000 is actually less than the original FY23 number, which is in column 6. And the reason for that is that instead of appropriating capital bill dollars to get where BGS needed to be, the institutions committee said, we are giving you authorization to sell a property. I believe it was
Baldwin Street,
10 or 14 Baldwin Street, and the proceeds from the sale up to 300,000.
14 Baldwin, that's on your sheet.
Oh, okay, you got it right there. It gave BGS authority to use up to 300,000 of any proceeds to sort of backfill what they pulled out from capital bonded dollars. So instead of borrowing at 5% interest, 300,000 of BGS major maintenance can come from proceeds from a property sale. And this is actually first line, but this is one of those lines where if you look back at the language, it'll provide a little bit of additional clarity because the language is an important piece of this.
and this is a good example of what happens as the bill works through the process. Because we didn't do this on our side. because we had kept it at 7.35 on our side. Then it went over to the other body and they moved some money around and they had a little different perspective and goal than our committee did. And they were looking for money. So they decided to look to major maintenance to cut it back about 300,000, but they didn't want to put BGS in a straitjacket. So we had also, on this side, had given authority to sell a couple buildings. When the state gives the BGS authority to sell some state-owned property, the proceeds of that sale come back to the capital bill. So sometimes it goes to the bottom line, sometimes we target it to a project. So that's what happened in this particular case. Wayne?
They didn't use very much of the 300,000 in that line, though.
Well, we're not there yet. We're only halfway through fiscal year.
Yeah, I'm not even, has the property, well, I guess.
Property hasn't, are they under contract yet?
13 Baldwin, I believe, has sold.
It has sold?
Eric Phil from BGS. Yeah, I believe we took a haircut on major maintenance to help with another priority. And then the make good was that we would take a piece of the 13 Baldwin sale. So it just kind of made us whole. Major maintenance is the most fun, flexible line in the bill. And so
It's our
a couple
catch-all.
of times over the years I've seen where like this committee or that committee or we are up against the wall and we say, hey, we'll good faith move some major maintenance money into this and then you'll take care of us next year. And it generally works out.
It's a slush fund.
It's another way.
It's kind of how we see it. I mean, we don't want to short riff BGS in their major maintenance, but it is a fund that kind of,
Right.
if we have extra money on the bottom line, after we do markup, say there's $50,000 or $10,000 on the bottom line, we'll put it in the major maintenance line.
Committee giveth and the committee taketh away.
And if we end up short on the bottom line, we kind of can look there too.
I'm just wondering, am I reading it right, though? They only used about $6,000, which is only, correct? Because the two numbers, they would have been the same.
I think the math is a little odd because at the end of the day, when, and I can't recall if this was in the House or the Senate, there was a little bit of either extra money on the bottom line or we were short a little bit. And so that was, I can't remember if it was added or subtracted. That's why there's this, 6,521. It's just to make the bottom line be zero.
You got to make the bottom line zero.
This doesn't reflect expenditures.
Yeah, it
That
doesn't,
may be
this is just what was appropriated.
That's current year now, what you're.
Yeah.
You're always going to see a really odd number usually in major maintenance. And you might also, in contingency planning and use, you might also see an odd number there. So don't worry about odd numbers.
So moving down to line 4, this is the line that shouldn't be in the upcoming capital bill, but it was previously an ongoing capital bill expense. This is for BGS engineering and architectural costs. For FY23, these costs were shifted over to the big appropriations bill. And so those costs are now being borne by the general fund instead of the capital bill. And I believe that was a proposal of the governor, so I imagine the governor's budget won't propose changing that. So you shouldn't see this line, but just so you're aware. Going down to line 7, 108 Cherry Street. So originally in Act 50, there was 3.1 million appropriated for FY22, nothing for 23. Act 180 appropriated an additional 2 million. I believe this was an inflationary pressure. There is another change pertaining to this project that I'm gonna come back to this because it's related to something further down. But just note that 2 million was added, and I believe this was a request from the governor, and so the House and Senate both concurred. Line 12, the Springfield State Correctional Facility door controls. I think this was another inflationary pressure. So originally it was 2.75 million appropriated in 22. So when I say originally it was Act 50, just note that you probably want to look at those columns 5, 6, and 7, and I'll try to I'll try to call out where I'm looking at those as opposed to columns 8, 9, and 10. But so in Act 50, 2.75 million appropriated in 22, nothing in 23. The governor proposed an additional 750,000 in 23 that was approved by the legislature for just inflationary pressures.
A general question, why isn't there some kind of designation, whether it's an add number or a negative number? Line 3 is a negative and some of the others we're looking at are positives.
We zeroed out.
Well, I would say that if I had room for more columns, you would have that, but I just, there's
You don't use
not enough.
parentheses or the spreadsheet?
There are additional columns in the underlying Excel spreadsheet, Excel file that show the positive and negative, but I pull those out when printing because it's just too much
The
information.
paper's not big enough.
And it would shrink the wording and
It just makes it difficult to
Yeah,
interpret what's.
So John, the way you read it is it's not a negative. The way you read it is zeroed out. So if you go to line 4, and that's your architectural engineering, if you go to 8 and 9, in FY 22, we put in 3.6 plus million. In FY 23, we put in 0. That's what that means. We just zeroed it out.
Yeah, but it's still a reduction.
Yeah, and that shows up on the bottom line.
What he's asking is, between line 7 and 10, what's the difference?
Right.
The total for the original act, the total for the new act. And it is in the Excel file. And I think when we go through the iterative process of these spreadsheets.
When you go through markup, you'll figure it out.
Okay.
And I'll probably hide the Act 50 columns just because you don't necessarily need to see those. It's just a matter of getting the information that's needed on the spreadsheet without making it too cluttered into the wording shrinking to where you can't even read it.
Because when we do markup, we just go through each line item and, we say, at the time, we said, well, they're going to need engineering dollars in both FY 22 and FY 23. So we kept it in there. The next year, we know that appropriation is going to pick it up. So we know we've got another 3.6 million that we can work with in our bill. And we don't worry about that as we go through line by line to mark up, to change those dollar amounts. That's why we have Dan and that's why we have Becky. And then it shows up on the bottom line.
Okay.
So the very bottom will say, are you over budget or are you under budget with the changes that you made?
It just makes it easier for me to pick up whether it's a reduction or.
So when you see a line there, line 4 in FY 23, you see that little mark? It's zeroed out. There's no money, 0. That's what that means. It was eliminated from FY 23 the previous year. FY 23, and when we did the initial 2-year capital bill, we said we'll put in of our bonded dollars 3.7 million plus in FY 23. We said that way back in the 21 session. When we came back here last year, things have changed. And the proposal was that 3.7 would be picked up in the appropriations in the general fund. So we knew we were zeroing out that appropriation in our bill in FY 23. That's what that little hyphen means. It's zeroed out. It's gone.
Okay, moving on to now going.
And to follow up on that, John, if you go down to lines 14 on down, 14 through 22 in FY 22, in both lines, column 5 and column 8, you're going to see the dash there. That never even, there was 0 requests for those particular items in FY 22. That's what that means. There's no money requested. Did I jump too far ahead, Dan?
That's all right. Okay, so I did the door controls. By line 16, 32 Cherry Street, parking garage renovations in Burlington. So originally in Act 50, you had appropriated $865,000 in FY 23. The governor in his proposed adjustment said we only need 565,000. I don't recall any other background on that.
We asked as a committee. We were looking for money.
Oh, okay.
We did more
Okay,
cut.
so it wasn't in the governor's proposal.
No.
Okay.
We asked, because we were looking for money. We asked BGS, are you gonna be able to get the full 865,000 out the door in FY '23? And we worked up the 565. That came from the committee,
Do you remember where that 300,000 went?
to the bottom line.
Oh.
Because we were moving money around within the budget.
Fund other projects.
Gotcha.
Okay, line 21. So this is an oddity. I'll give a little background. So in Act 50, when it was passed, the General Assembly said, okay, administration, we've appropriated this amount of money, but we have all of this federal money coming through the state through the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA. So please find expenditures in the capital bill up to 15 million that we can shift from bonded dollars to ARPA dollars. And the administration subsequently came back and said, we've identified about, I think it was about 5.7 million of expenses, 500,000 which would be FY22, the rest FY23, where we can shift those costs from the capital bill to this federal funding source. And so here's the first instance of where in Act 50, you appropriated 600,000 for 3-acre parcel stormwater planning, and you subsequently pulled that out in FY23. And so the way that would work, the way that shakes out in the language is in your capital bill, you still have the authorizing language saying, money can be spent on this project, but then that money itself shifted to the big bill where the appropriations committees said, okay, we'll spend 600,000 on stormwater planning, or we'll spend X amount on this in ARPA money. So it's a little complicated, and there'll be a few more instances of this throughout the bill, but that's essentially what's happening.
So I want to stop there and ask a question. I know we've got a lot of new members to the legislature, and some members didn't work in the money world last year for ARPA. The American Rescue Plan Act, it's federal money coming in to the state. We have, about $1 billion coming in total? And it's the COVID, the third round of COVID. Are new members aware of that act from the ARPA and the American Rescue Plan Act? Because that's what this is all about. And there are some capital infrastructure projects that qualify for that. So initially we put that request in our capital budgeting when we did our capital budget 2 years ago. Because we weren't sure what the guidelines were going to be around the federal dollars. Those hadn't been developed yet, but we wanted to get a portion of those ARPA dollars for capital project. Then when we came back last year, working with Joint Fiscal Office, which was working with the administration, which was working with the federal government, the feds were developing the guidelines around the use of those ARPA dollars. And then it became more restricted in terms of what it could be used for. So all last session, we were working with the ARPA guidelines being developed, and then realized some of the wish lists that we had for them helping us on the capital budgeting wasn't going to come through. And then the next step that happened after we figured all that out and picked out our projects, Appropriations Committee is really the hub for that $1 billion. They wanted all of the ARPA funding, even if it went to capital projects, they wanted those actual dollars to funnel through their bill. So this 600,000 is showing up more in the appropriations bill, but the language as to where it goes is in both bills. That's where it gets really complicated, really complicated. And that's all new in our capital world. We haven't had to deal with that before.
And hopefully, as far as ARPA is concerned, we won't have to deal with it.
Not much longer anyway.
Yeah, but
Well, we'll have the new,
knowing about it,
we'll have the new infrastructure bill come through.
there will be some reporting associated with ARPA that might come through. So it's good to have a little bit of background, but hopefully, as far as appropriations. Okay, so lines 23, 24, these are additions that were not in the governor's capital budget request that I think both of these items started in, they came in House
Here.
institutions, yes.
Here,
And I'm not sure, I don't think the Senate modified these two. But the first is Windsor State Property. This is just providing some money to do demolition, salvage. So I think this was an old correctional facility that's now not in use. Just a boarded up building that still has a lot of barbed wire fence around it. So I think this is a first slug of money at taking down the building and the structure. I don't think it covers all of it, so you might see requests come through to provide additional funding to do this, but.
What'd you do with the electric chair there?
oh, that's down here in the pavilion, isn't it, the electric chair? From the old prison, from the old,
Yeah, it's like in a museum or.
yeah, it's from the old prison,
Yeah.
yeah. It's down around somewhere.
So which
Let's try it
facility
out.
was this?
This is the Windsor, this was the Windsor Correctional,
Wow.
this was the Windsor,
Windsor.
On display, is it?
Don't they have it in the legislative lounge?
all right. This was the Windsor Correctional Facility.
American Historical Society has it.
Yeah, yeah. This is the Windsor,
Walk in.
this, hello, folks. This was the Windsor Correctional Facility. And if you remember, we went through with the Women's Correctional Facility where all the women moved to. Remember that? And one of them was Windsor. And then I said Windsor then got converted to a work camp because you asked about work camp beds. And it was getting to a point we weren't having enough offenders to fill our beds per se, but also looking at the cost of each facility to operate. And then it was decided we would close the Windsor facility, took 100 beds offline. And that happened a good 6 years ago, I would say. So we own 100 acres there with some buildings, and the cell blocks and that are really antiquated and outdated. I mean, they're just not appropriate for housing offenders. It's just not appropriate. So we have the total parcel there is about 900 acres. The total parcel. It used to be the only correctional facility we had in the state, and it was the Windsor Farm. That's what they called it. And then in the 60s, when we started with St. Albans, and then the Chittenden facility, that's when we started to regionalize our correctional facilities. And Windsor was the only prison we had. It was a state prison, and then your counties had the cells that held your detainees. And only sentence folks went to the Windsor facility. And in the 60s, late 60s and through the 70s, that started to change. But Windsor stayed online, but it wasn't used as a farm so much back then. So anyway, what we've done of the 900 acres, 800 acres of those are now in Fish and Wildlife as a wildlife management area. And then 100 acres we kept as a buffer around the core of the facility. The core of the facility, I think, is maybe, I don't even think it's 30 acres. I think it's pretty small, but you had to have the buffer around there. So when the administration closed and we agreed to close the Windsor Correctional Facility, the question then becomes, what do we do with that state-owned land and state-owned property? And there's been some discussions on what we do. There's been some task force that looked at it. BGS was forced to look at our agencies and departments internally to see if there's any use for that before we sell it. We then set up a task force to come back with some options. Some options may be a public-private opportunity. And at one point, the administration wanted to sell the property. And this committee said, no, we're not selling this yet. We want to really see what are other options out there. So this was an old correctional facility. We own the land and we own the buildings. So that's what it is. It's a beautiful spot.
Line 24 pertains to our Office of Legislative Information Technology. For some background on this project, our IT office is currently located down the street here at 9 Baldwin. Their servers and I think some of their other equipment is in the dank, dingy basement of the State House in a not suitable place for such equipment. So the idea with this is let's renovate some space at 133 State to be able to bring our staff and our equipment into one place in an environment that's suitable for both. So this 1.4 million is an addition to, I believe, about 700,000 that was previously appropriated for this project. It will hopefully be enough to get most of it, or I think it should be enough to get all the way there. I think
That was the intent.
Yeah. And I think the work is ongoing with the hope of them being able to move in next January or later this year. And then BGS is itching to sell Baldwin. So that created a little bit of tension between the House and the Senate, because I think the Senate wanted to let BGS do what it wanted to do, and the House said, well, we need to make sure our IT folks are taken care of before you sell their office space from underneath them. And so that is where and I think the House at least won the concession of, okay, we'll direct BGS to not put the property, put 9 Baldwin up for sale until we can put that into 133 State. Okay, moving on. Line 29, this is the physically secure recovery residence, a big project. 11.6 had been appropriated in Act 50 and FY22. The governor came back and for the budget adjustment said we need an additional 3.2 million driven mainly by inflation. Line 32, I think this was also in the governor's budget adjustment request. This is funding to do some ADA compliance work in correctional facilities to the tune of 1.2 million. This might be revised upward in the upcoming capital budget, so you might see this again. And then line 33 is an addition that started in the House to start looking at what it would take to provide HVAC in correctional facilities that don't currently have it. And I believe none of them do except for Chittenden.
Rutland.
Rutland, okay. So this is nowhere near what is needed to do all this work, but it's sort of some seed money to begin researching and to get some estimates.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tristan.
About the ADA compliance and DOC facilities, I was curious about that being kind of a added. It seems like the kind of thing you would have a long-term trajectory on, knowing if facilities are in or out of compliance, and it would be on someone's plan. And this doesn't speak of a plan. I'm just curious what drives that.
I would defer to BGS to address that.
We're gonna put you on the spot, Joe Asia.
Does that mean we have to be listening?
Yeah.
My ears perked up. For the record, Joe Agent with BGS. ADA is one of those things just like code, just because things change, come along, you don't have to update. Some of this stuff that has taken place has been like grab bars or toilets, some of the things that they've come through and have decided. One interesting one with a toilet was the fact that the handle was just on the wrong side of the tank. And actually that was a new one for me. I've never heard that one before. That it can't be on the grab bar side, it has to be on the free side. So when the walking through Department of Justice, they looked at things like that. There were some areas where corrections, Newport going into the lower day yard, that was not going to be acceptable other than people who could get down to that yard. Over time, things has changed, and also when the DOJ came through and said, no, you can't do that. So you have to make that conform. Women's correctional facility at Chittenden, the holding cell that has to change. Because of some of the intakes that were had there with the males, there was a slab of concrete, raised concrete on the floor, and that's where the mattress would go. They're saying that's not accessible. If you're in a wheelchair, that's too low. So what they want is a bunk installed. And the logistics of that is also the restroom and everything else. So there are things that over time changes on how the facility is being operated. Simple ones that our maintenance staff is changing out is not in the capital bill, or things like we go out and get a vendor for our hand towels and toilet paper dispensers and soap dispensers. The companies that we have that come in and put those in, and sometimes they put them in the wrong spot. There are some of these that we're changing, we're off by an inch or so. That's not the items of the capital bill, there are bigger ones in the capital bill, and I have to find that list. Shower.
Just another one to add to the illustrative list. I was out in the yard of one of the facilities, I can't remember which, but they had put some raised bed gardens. And it found that we had to pave a path to the raised bed garden in order to make it accessible, which I guess nobody was thinking of it when they put in the garden, so.
Right. That brings
like
up
that.
another one in Springfield, the volleyball court is sand. About half of that cannot. You gotta pay.
Some of this came up in a DOJ walkthrough?
Yes, there was a lawsuit that working with an inmate who gone to 3 correctional facilities.
Thank you.
The other thing too is we do have, I know in the Springfield facility, we do have a unit put aside specifically for folks who have mobility issues. We don't have elevators in our living units. Our living units are 2 stories. We don't have elevators. So what has happened in Springfield, and I don't know if it's happened in Newport, is that for folks with real mobility issues are going to be on that bottom floor.
In that living unit, we have added a lift to get them up because there are so many.
So many, yeah. And we had to get a variance for that.
Yes.
You can't put an elevator in there. So it's those type of things. So when you look at building a new correctional facility, you're going to address those ADA issues from the get-go. So you probably build one with an elevator. Maybe. Security is an issue on that one.
Security is an issue with an elevator because whether you ride up with them or not, the destruction that can happen.
Right, so you may find a new facility has a larger footprint so that they can avoid situations where an elevator might be required.
Right.
You know, you think, oh, I'm gonna save space, I'm gonna stack things.
But then you need more land, which then you can't build a facility without having land. Which then goes, do you buy land or do you do it with something you already have?
Swallow the spider to catch the fly.
Yeah.
Most facilities are very limited in their up and down. They're not multi-floor.
Your living units in Newport, your living units in Springfield are,
A few steps up.
more than a few steps.
Oh, yeah?
Living units in Newport are steps up and down.
And how many steps? About 10 or 12? Isn't it?
Roughly that.
Yeah.
Oh, it is?
I don't know how
I
many.
don't
There
remember.
is one living unit, building in Newport. When we built that one, you enter in and you ramp down to the lower level.
Okay,
and
yeah.
There's good 20 steps to take you to the step.
I didn't remember that.
Yep.
Newport, huh?
Okay, we gotta keep going.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see, okay. Line 38, so this is getting into section 4, the Agency of Commerce Community Development. Section 38 pertains to major maintenance at state historic sites and other types of places. What happened here if you go over to column 9, where between column 6 and 9, about 300 40,000 has been added. This was an action done in the House just to provide some additional funding because there were a few projects that weren't funded that ACCD was, I think, ready to move on. And so the House and Senate provided funding to help make that happen.
And that all came out from testimony that we received from Historic Preservation Division. That they had more projects coming in and they requested an additional appropriation from what the governor recommended.
Before we flip the page, what's line 40? One. Unmarked burial fund.
That's a good question. I don't know.
That
I didn't
is
know that.
unmarked, no, it's not veterans. It is Native American. They were doing a lot of construction up in Franklin County at one time and they came across some Native American graves that were not known to be there.
Interesting.
So we have set up a fund within historic preservation that if there's excavation for a state project, or I think other projects, like a municipal project, they come across remains, Native American remains, there's a fund that they can go to mark those graves.
Yeah.
And you look questionable. Eric.
To learn more, you can read the BGS policy on encountering skeletal remains. It's there.
It's true, when we expanded, was it the courthouse in St. Jay?
St. John's
We came
Courthouse,
across a cemetery, a grave.
V-Trans had a road project up
Yeah.
north too.
You could see them when they were excavating.
Everything stopped.
Families buried together. Two
So,
adults and two
It's not
children.
boring in this committee, what you find out. So let's keep going, because we don't want to have time for Joe.
So page 2, line 69, this pertains to Vermont State Colleges. You all had appropriated $100,000 in Act 50 in FY23 for infrastructure transformation planning. So this is sort of rethinking how the state colleges work and what the land and building needs are associated with that. The governor came back in the capital budget adjustment and asked to bring that from 100,000 to 1 million. The House and Senate ended up at 900,000, so they dropped about 100,000. I think that was just based on testimony. There was some uncertainty as far as like where that money was going and how much was actually needed.
Troy.
Can I just get some context on? This doesn't have to be long, but I'm just kind of struck by the fact that the difference in the grand scheme of things between 1 million and 900,000. How does that decision no, we're going to give you 900,000.
It was from testimony, and we didn't think some of what they were doing is like, hey, wait a minute, that's not capital expenditures.
Okay.
Some of it was, we just didn't feel it was thought out well enough to substantiate the full million, and they're going to be coming back this year.
So line 70, this was sort of a last minute ad in the House, and then there was some back and forth with the House and Senate on this. But late in the game when the capital, all the big important legislation was on the verge of being passed out, we had some money on the bottom line in here. I think right around 4 million, and the committee was looking for ways to potentially put that to use, and received information from, I don't know if it was the Commerce
and Approps. They came walking in just as we were finishing up.
So there are nursing programs at UVM, at the state colleges, and I believe at Norwich that could use some money for new simulation laboratories for their nursing programs. And so the request that ended up in the House bill was 4 million that was going to go to AHS to then sub-grant out to colleges to do this work. And when the Senate took testimony, they were less certain that the 4 million could be spent in a timely manner because it was really sort of a last minute thing. The colleges didn't necessarily have a full plan. So I'm not sure where the Senate ended up. They might have taken all the money out, and then in negotiations in the conference committee, some money was added back to go directly to the state colleges and to go directly to Norwich. And then if you look at the language in the final capital bill, it required UVM, state colleges, and Norwich to come back with some some better information as far as what is the financial need and what do they intend to do with that money. So that's something to look out for. I don't know if it's come to our reports webpage yet, but it's something to look out for this coming session.
So this was a request, the Commerce Committee was working on a big workforce bill. And they thought that they could use ARPA money for these nursing program simulation labs. So when the bill got down to Appropriations Committee, and they were looking at the guidelines coming from the feds that didn't qualify. So they came knocking on our door for this. So it was at the very last minute, we were putting the final touches on the bill. We had not had any testimony. We heard from JFO that it would be eligible for bonded dollars. It would be appropriate. So we put it in the last minute, knowing that our colleagues over on the Senate side would do a little deeper dive than we had time for. So be prepared. Things do happen out there that they do. That one kind of blew us away. We weren't anticipating that.
I suspect that part of this is for these simulation dummies that they have. And
Yeah, there's just a
they're
nuisance
expensive.
on those, yeah.
And in order to train nurses or people, they really need those, and they're expensive parts, and you're probably picking this part.
I suspect that one.
Okay, so I'm gonna, line 75 is on the same subject. It's just money going to Norwich for same use. Going into section 9, Agency of Natural Resources. So lines 81, 82, 83, this all deals with dam safety and providing funding for repairs to various dams throughout the state. And there are different tiers of dams based on the potential damage they would cause if they were to fail. So there's a high hazard dam, medium hazard, and I think it's just low hazard. There might be another word in there, but significant, high, and
I think it's low, yeah.
Okay. And so in Act 50, you had appropriated a total of $1.115 million over 2 years for various dam safety projects. The administration came back for budget adjustment and wanted to up that to 4.3 million total, or excuse me, 4.6 million total for the 2 years. Most, and the rest of that would have been added in FY23. Based on the testimony you took, and I don't have some of the background, but based on the testimony you took, the decision was made to sort of break out these appropriations to target them more effectively. And so the 310,000 for FY22 remained the same, remained on the same line just for general dam safety hydrology. And then 3.115 went specifically to high and significant hazard dam safety improvements. So these are the dams, if they fail, they're gonna, people are gonna be hurt or killed. Property is going to be destroyed, so we want to make sure those are up to snuff. And then 190,000 was put aside specifically for Little Hosmer Dam. I don't know where that is.
I don't remember.
Little Osmer?
Osmer.
It's in Craftsbury, I think.
It's in Craftsbury.
Yep.
And I think this was a little bit less than, when you add it all together, it was a little bit less than what the governor had asked for.
And that all came out in testimony. When we saw the testimony, we said, wait a minute, this isn't adding up. So, Tristan?
I have a spreadsheet question for line 81. There's no entry for that in the column where it corresponds to this.
That's because where the governor had asked for all the additional funding to just be in this general category, the General Assembly said, no, we want to put this money into more targeted, at least for FY23, we want to target this money more. And so the money was shifted from line 81 to lines 82 and 83. That's why it's blanked out.
And on the dam safety, are those state-owned lands exclusively?
State-owned dams. Okay. Line 84, this is a recommendation that came from the governor, and this is associated with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So this is the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed last year. It increased funding for clean water and drinking water projects, but it did, with that increased money, it puts the states, municipalities on the hook for providing the match. I think the match requirement is lessened than it would be normally. I believe it's typically a 20% match. For IIJA, it's a 10% match, but we did need to set some money aside to make sure that we can bring the full amount of federal money that we're eligible for to the state. So the governor asked for 2.8 million in FY23. I imagine there's going to be a request for more. I don't know if that's going to flow through the capital bill or if it's going to come through in the big bill, but just something to be aware of. You might see that request for FY24-25.
But I have a question. Is that a situation where the amount that's being requested is pretty much set to match a specific grant, or the committee could say, well, there's more federal dollars in this program, we should actually increase the match to capture more?
I think this is a case where the 2.8 is what was needed to maximize that federal money, but there certainly could be a situation where
that comes up.
A request could come in where it's not going to get you what you need from the feds, and
They have a different
that's a
fiscal
decision.
year.
Yeah.
They have a different fiscal year, so flow's different.
Thank you.
Okay, line 87 is another example of where funding was shifted from the capital bill to this American Rescue Plan Act, the federal dollars. So the governor, the administration identified 300,000 that could be funded with ARPA. So that was backed out. Let's see. Line 90, this is another fun ones. The rustic cabin construction program. So what happened here is if you recall, we talked about reallocations. So looking back at previous appropriations and saying, hey, you still need this money, what's happening? This is an instance where you look back a few years and there was this pot of money that had been set aside for Forest Parks and Recreation to build these rustic cabins. But the requirement in the law was that they work with the tech center, I think the tech centers. And I think COVID played a part in this, but FPR determined that they just couldn't, the tech centers couldn't provide the expertise that was needed to get these done in the time frame that the capital bill required. So you ended up reallocating, I think it was 775,000.
Yeah, it was a weird convoluted thing that we had to do.
200,000 you placed back into the rustic cabin construction program, but without the requirement of working explicitly with the tech center. So there's just, whoever can do the work, hire them to do the work. And then the rest of that money that was reallocated flowed to the bottom line that you could deploy elsewhere. So the 200,000 addition was courtesy of a reallocation that you'll see further down. 93, this is a subject matter that is near and dear to the Senate's heart. This is I don't know the name of the organization, but they raise and stock walleyes into our waterways, into our lakes. And they came into the Senate Institutions Committee and said, hey, with 25,000, we can put in another tank to raise walleye, which, gives us the ability to get them out into the waters. They're a popular sport fish. So the Senate went along with that and it remained in the bill that passed. So it's a fairly small amount of money, but they are prominent because they're very popular. Well, I'm sure they're popular here too, but
Not very.
The Senate wanted to give them a little bit of extra
Bargaining chip.
And the guys who present the ask are pretty popular.
Yeah, they're
They fished walleye in the bay.
okay. So lines 100 through 109, or 111 pertains to clean water. Two things happened here. First is, as we noted or I hope I noted in the prior presentation, when you do a 2-year capital bill, for the first year for clean water, that 11 million that gets appropriated goes to the individual agencies. And then for the second year, you sort of just appropriate 11 million into this catch-all fund that will then be doled out when you do the budget adjustment. So 11 million was appropriated for future use based on a recommendation from the Clean Water Board. So you then, in the budget adjustment, put that money to use with the various agencies, but with the caveat that in a lot of these categories, these projects were also eligible for ARPA funding. And so rather than the full 11 million, you ended up appropriating, rather than the full 11 million in year one and year two, in year one, you ended up at 10.5 million. And then in year two, it was 6.66 million. So the rest of that, the clean water projects are still made whole through the ARPA funding that's in the big bill. So they got 11 million both years. Or clean water generally got 11 million in year one, 11 million in year two. Hopefully that explanation made sense to everyone. Okay. Military, line 114. This was an addition proposed by the governor just due to inflation that the General Assembly approved.
That's for our armories. That's where that really goes, major maintenance.
So line 119, this is where I'm actually going to refer back to 108 Cherry. So this is the new public safety field station in Williston. In the budget adjustment, the administration asked for an additional 3.5 million, driven I think primarily by inflation. And then after the bill was enacted, BGS went to the emergency board and said, hey, we're actually still short. We need, I think it's an additional 3.4 million. We're proposing to reallocate funding from 108 Cherry that we're not going to be able to use immediately to be able to complete the Williston project. So what that means for you is most likely in the FY 24-25 capital bill, the administration is going to ask to then backfill to make 108 Cherry whole with the money that was transferred to the Williston field station. So a piece here that is in the spreadsheet and then a piece here that's not in the spreadsheet, but it's good context because I'm sure it's going to come up again when you get the capital bill.
Joe, how much was that? Was it 3.4, 2.8 that we did?
3.405.
3.405. Yep.
Line 121, I believe, I don't know if this was from the administration or something that started the General Assembly, but it's money to a feasibility study for the police academy in Pittsburgh. Is
that 50?
Yeah, that was
that was from
that was
the administration.
administration.
But actually, that didn't change.
Yeah, that didn't change.
Okay, sorry, I don't know why I highlighted that. Okay, section 13. So this pertains to the Big E, which is a part of a greater exposition facility that's in Massachusetts. We have a building there where our producers, our ag producers go, I don't know if it's annually or annually.
September.
They advertise Vermont products. So the building that we own down there needs a lot of maintenance. And so in Act 50, you had appropriated some money to do some of the maintenance that's needed. The administration came back in the budget adjustment and said, we need an additional 720,000 for roof work, woodwork, and then some design and consulting associated with the Big E building. And then also they asked for 330,000. Sorry, the 720,000 was an add to line 126, which is the major maintenance category, and then initial 330,000 was for project design and planning. And that, so one more project. So on the last page, line 152, 2 Aiken, which is the screen building, sort of kitty corner to the State House. This was previously occupied by BGS. During the pandemic, the legislature, took ownership of that building with the intent that, if we need to spread out more because of, public health concerns, and we now have a place where we can either put office space or have committee meetings or whatever you need. And then the decision was then made to let's renovate this building. It's in rough shape. It needs the wiring was knob and tube, which is a fire hazard. It just needed a lot of repairs. And so we were able to use. I'm going to actually cite another federal COVID bill. But in the first COVID bill that passed, right after the pandemic started, a fund was created called the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which brought, I think something on the order of $1 billion or $1 billion $400 to Vermont. This money was, whereas ARPA is a little more general as far as how it can be used, this was very specifically, for COVID related things. And so we were able to use some of that money, and the legislature appropriated some money to itself to make modifications in the State House and initially 4 Aiken, but 4 Aiken is a completely different. But to make modifications to make them safe for use and habitation, and so we were able to use federal money to build the new code room in the State House. We were able to use federal money to really redo most of 2 Aiken, except for the 3rd floor, and where this pot of money comes in order to complete work on the building, do some fire safety things. $185,000 was requested by our Sergeant at Arms, Janet Miller, to complete that work. Unfortunately, it's been delayed because of we can't get the fire marshal to come and inspect the building. And then there's also a connection that needs to happen under Governor Aiken Avenue that I don't think is going to happen now until spring or summer. And so until that happens, we can't, the fire marshal, I believe, has said we can't have more than a few people actually working in the building. And so our human resources office is there, and I think a couple of other staff, and that's it right now. But hopefully we'll be able to do something with it because it's very nice inside now. Okay, lines 170 through 182. These are all reallocations that were made that were inserted for fiscal year 23 in the capital budget adjustments. Those totaled about 3.5 million, which then flows to the bottom line and allows you to fund different projects. Some of these were proposed by the administration, but many of them were the result of the repo committee doing its due diligence. Line 1, okay, so now we're going to get into the source of funding, and I'm only going to touch on this briefly because I don't think it's going to come up this biennium, but line 188, this is where the treasurer issued bonds and was able to sell some bonds at a premium, which resulted in additional bonding capacity for us. And so that flows into the capital bill in that we now have some additional capacity to fund projects. So that 16 million is there as a source of funding. And so the result of the collaboration of the House and the Senate is that you passed a 2-year capital budget adjustment that spent 147 million available to spend. So you'll see that line 197 all the way over on the far. Sorry, the column's not labeled on this last page. They're not labeled on the pages. Sorry. If you go to the far right column, you'll see line 197 where there's 147 million available to spend. You spent, or you allocated, 143 million, which left 3.9 million on the bottom line. So that's bonding capacity that we will not use, which saves us the debt service. And that was a push from the governor, which actually, in hindsight, is probably a decent thing because interest rates have gone up so dramatically over the past year. So saving a little bit of debt service is good. And then finally, at the end here, this is where I've synced the spreadsheet up with some policy language pertaining to that sale of 13 Baldwin that would free up 300,000 that could flow to BGS major payments. So I just wanted to account for it somewhere in this spreadsheet. And that is all I have for you. I would recommend at some point that hopefully Becky, you also implemented maybe, I think there's some stuff in the language that you'll want to see that I should walk you through. I think she should be the one to walk you through it, but that's all I have for you for the budget adjustment.
Why did we, I was just curious why we allocated money out of justice reinvestment to,
Because we didn't use it.
just wasn't used. It was a lot, it was a big pool
It was-
that year.
Well, it was, what line are you on? Just, okay, I see it. None of it was really expended. We had put in 250,000 and it was just kind of holding it. Because there was no agreement. That initial 250,000 was to go towards BGS for the beginning planning of the replacement of the women's correctional facility. And we did that back in 2018. It was really,
Senator Probst put it
18?
in the parking lot.
yeah, Senator Probst didn't want to do it. So we reached an agreement, well, we'll just park it here for Justice Reinvestment 2. And Justice Reinvestment 2 is the contract that we had with the state and the Council of State Governments to really look at our correctional policies and initiatives to see how we can manage our population better. So you're going to hear about Justice Reinvestment 2 on Tuesday afternoon. So we just put it there because we didn't want to lose the money. Because Senate didn't want to go along with replacing the women's facility. So we lost 2 years in that process. So last year, the money isn't going to be used. There was 1.5 million that the administration put in to start the process of replacing the women's facility. So that 250 was just sitting there, so we brought it back. It didn't hurt anything in Justice Reinvestment 2. It didn't hurt anything. Chip?
Didn't some of these adjustments come as a result of when the CARES money and the ARPA money hit the state? Committees started to appropriate funds while Ledge Council was determining the appropriate method of putting them in. And so was that what some of these adjustments come from? That it was determined after the appropriation was made that those were unappropriate or inappropriate expenditures for the ARPA money.
I don't think that's the case with these reallocations.
Okay.
If you're referring to section 18, I don't think that's the
Okay.
case. But those, where I called out the places where we shifted from capital to ARPA, those are examples of where the administration and our Ledge Council agreed that we can use ARPA money for those purposes.
Okay, thank you.
But I don't think there are any reallocations that were a result of us realizing after the fact that we couldn't use.
Okay.
So for the committee, when we get the governor's budget next Friday, our starting point will be this spreadsheet. This is going to be our starting point.
Really?
Yeah, this is going to be our starting point, so don't lose the spreadsheet. You're going to be working, you're going to go back to this for reference. Because some of these projects are going to be continuing. And the columns you're really going to want to look at are 8, 9, and 10. Those are the columns. And you'll be comparing this spreadsheet with the new spreadsheet that we get because some of these projects are going to be ongoing. Okay? So that's why I walked you through what we did initially for the 2 years, so at least you could get that under your belt to understand the initial 2-year process, because that's where we're going to be this time, is at that first spreadsheet. We're going to establish the 2-year process when we get the governor's budget, but it's gonna be built off of these columns on budget adjustment, because that's what's in place now, is these columns. So that's gonna be the work, and then a year from now, we'll be creating another spreadsheet that looks like this. So at the end of our work this year, we're gonna be creating a spreadsheet, it's gonna be bigger than this, so you can read it. But we'll be creating a spreadsheet with just two columns. FY 20, I gotta think this through, FY 24 and FY 25. So that's what it'll look like at the end of this session. When we come back next year, it's gonna look like this, because we're gonna be adjusting those numbers for FY 24 and FY 25. So just to hopefully help the committee to know what's ahead of us. Coming down the path.
When the treasurer came in, he talked about the cash fund at all.
A little bit. Well, that's another layer here. I don't want to confuse the
Wait until
committee.
the governor's budget.
Yeah, I don't want to confuse the committee with that. Between the ARPA funds and the cash funds and the capital fund, and I don't want to confuse the committee with any more. Do it step by step is what I'm thinking. For that. So it's not so overwhelming. Does it feel overwhelming to committee members? Is it feeling
Yeah.
overwhelming?
Manageable.
Yeah, just based on his question, I want to put a plug out there that the emergency board is meeting today to, one of its tasks is to adopt the consensus revenue forecast. So while it's not necessarily as relevant to this committee, it is relevant to the work that you'll do on the House floor, because it informs the budget and the revenue bills. And so that resource from our legislative economist talked about will be available on the JFO website. If it's not available now, it will be this afternoon. So that's a place you can go to look, or you can attend the emergency board meeting, which I imagine will be here in the governor's starting living office. But it's always interesting when our economist talks about the economy. So if that's something you're fascinated with, then means any of you.
Thank you, Dan.
The vultures start circling.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan lives in this committee. So we are running a little late, but I would like to put Joe back on the hot seat just to continue some of our project updates. If you need to take a personal break, take a personal break. I'm gonna work through here as much as I can so we can leave early today if possible, depending on the weather. Okay, Joe, I don't know where we kind of left off. I hope you know. Was it one?
It's like line 6.
Yeah, no.
Wasn't that bad.
It's not that bad. I think it was the Waterbury roof replacement, line 13. If you could identify yourself for the record too before you start.
For the record, I'm Joe Agee with Buildings and General Services. I can do a quick update for line 11 though.
Okay,
The question was asked, how much the prior allocations for that? And that was $3,525,000.
if people want to work off this big one, you can. It's easier to read. It is columns 5, 6, and 7.
Waterbury Historic Core Roof Replacements. We left off on? Yes, door control, right. So Waterbury, after Irene took out, flooded our area and we demoed a good portion of the buildings that were deemed not worth salvaging, it left what's known as the historic core, the forensic public safety building, Hanks and Weeks. And what was never done to those buildings at the time was to repair and or replace the slate roof, except for the Weeks building when we renovated that after the main project was complete. So what this is doing is going back through now and starting to replace the 100-year-plus old slate roofs. We have tried patching them, but what is happening is when you go up onto the roof and patch, you're breaking 3 to 4 slates as you're replacing 2. So they're pretty brittle. A lot of them are starting to fall off. So in the springtime, our maintenance crew goes through and picks up the slates that have fallen to the ground, and then we got to bring people in to patch. So this is going to be a wholesale replacement over many years due to the cost.
You gotta go with Slate.
Historic, yes. Historic preservation, they're talking with them, has allowed us in some of the areas that are not viewable from the horseshoe of the main road, that we're gonna be looking into imitation slate, similar to what is on 2 Aiken. And the valleys are gonna have more copper. Right now, they're very narrow valleys, a lot of it is slate, so that'll
Well, if it
help us out.
lasted 100 years, it's not probably too bad.
So we have some questions here. Tristan, did you ask your question? Okay, Connor.
Just to become more familiar with the complex in my mind, are these buildings occupied? What
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Yes.
Agents-
After we spent, I don't know how many millions, 140 some odd million, something like that, to put them back together, they are occupied.
Are they above the floodplain or are they?
Oh, yeah, fluvial erosion zone.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
There were multiple levels.
Yeah,
We had settled on 500+ year flood elevation in all of our buildings, and thankfully in Waterbury, what's now known as the first floor is at or above that.
oh, yeah.
What was known as the basement and or the sub-basement and or tunnels have all been filled with a lightweight fill or something like that.
We did all that in this committee. We learned a lot about 100-year levels, 500-year floodlines, fluvial erosion.
There's that too, yes.
There's that too. But the thing, we also have the Agency of Human Services, the bulk of the agency executive branch. It's not the public coming in for services, it's the executive branch. Our Agency of Human Services is there. You've got the Department of Mental Health, Department of DCF, Dale, DEVA is there. And then we also have on site, we have the headquarters of Department of Public Safety, our state police headquarters, thank you. And we also have our forensic lab, which is connected with the Department of Public Safety. And our emergency management operation, like the storm we had a few weeks ago, was around Christmas, whenever that big storm came in. The emergency management, you may have heard, was activated. In the space that they do that's over in Waterbury as well. Connor and then Wayne.
You actually both answered my questions. I was there the day after Irene. I can't, you guys are magicians putting that place back together the way it was.
We lived.
We do a lot of things. It's a little bit of time, a little bit of money. We have a lot of money.
A lot of money.
A little bit of time, a lot of money.
We lived it in
Lot of
this
time, lot of
committee. We lived it.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it was a heavy lift.
Yeah.
We lived it. So Wayne, Gina, Tristan.
I'm just curious, how did historical deal with the tunnels?
They were okay with it because that is a bonus with working with historic preservation, to be looking at that stuff because of the FEMA funding. FEMA would not allow us to be occupying that, so something had to be done with that. So they're left in place and they're just been funded.
Gina and Tristan.
Did FEMA redo all the flood maps in the area after Irene?
That I don't know.
Eric?
I recall they were in the middle of redoing them before Irene because it was the same people that we were fighting with in the select board meetings about flood levels that came with the forms to fill out after the flood.
Tristan?
Do you, to the extent possible, take slates off and try to resell them?
We do not, it's the contractor. Stuff like that for us, we go through our division of surplus, and that just is too, forgive the phrase, heavy of a lift because of, boxing them up and having people come in and look at them. The roofer who bids on them, price is lower because of that,
Okay,
because
well,
they do salvage some. So the people who are in the slate business do. There's also some, when I was doing Wasson Hall, which is no longer there, we actually had some people stop by, some artists who paint on slate had stopped by and were asking for some. But it is, like taking them off, boxing them up, that's all on the roofer.
Sure, I'm just glad it's happening one way or another.
Yes. The contractors are responsible for recycling as much as possible. White River Junction courthouse renovation. This has been out there for quite a few years. We started back in Acts of 15. After we built that in the 80s, we've had some issues with driving rain coming in through the masonry work into the inside and in and around the windows. And so we investigated that years ago and found that the flashing, the through wall flashing that goes from your brick up to the inside of your inner wall between that space of the brick and your inner inside wall has sagged in some areas. So we fixed some, not all, but we also have to do a major HVAC upgrade in that facility. So what we're doing is we're combining the outside work, the inside work, working with judiciary. They need a larger secure entrance to process people. Right now it's in a lobby and it just doesn't work well. They stack up. So all that comes to play with new boilers, new HVAC, new fixing the brickwork, and also some exterior work. We're planning this. Brattleboro Courthouse roof, that actually went through that renovation back in around, I would say 2010, 2011. Something very similar. But now we have to replace the roof down there. We've had multiple leaks over the past 3 years that getting the roofer in there is just, putting patches on top of patches. Some of the roof is a metal roof, some of it is membrane. That's what this money is for. And the money that we see here, the 100,000, that was the start of getting the design done in place. So we'll have that ready to go. (32) Cherry Street parking garage renovation. That's similar to 108. It's starting to fall apart. The 32 Cherry Street complex the original building was built in '68, and in the '80s, '90s, we put an addition on. The original building had some parking. We put additional underground parking in just a matter of time of just the salt again dripping off of vehicles, not doing major maintenance on the facility. That the concrete has started to fail and the rust developing on the reinforcement steel.
Don't ever own parking garages.
Except there was never get involved in a land war in Asia.
Right.
111 State Street here in Montpelier, the stack area. As was discussed earlier in the week, the Department of Libraries was moved to Barrie unceremoniously. And so that has left a vacant area that was the stacks. When the building was originally constructed, it was just an open 2-story structure. They came in and put these stacks, and the stacks are structural in the fact that you're actually walking on. They're marble slabs inside the book racks themselves. So that does take up 3 stories altogether. And so what this does will be removing these stacks, putting another floor in, upgrading all the HVAC that's in that area to handle that, provide the air that's needed for office space in that back area, and then we'll collapse the lease space that the judiciary is leasing at 112 State Street and bring it back into their main building.
So where this is, you folks have been on that floor, you just haven't been aware of it. So when we have a meeting, when there's caucuses or special meetings of new member legislators, whatever, 109, go over to 109, right? You go up to the 2nd floor. We've all been there, right? For different meetings. You go up to the 2nd floor and then you go into that area that is for legislative. Instead of going into that meeting room you come into a big room and there's some big round tables there, and then on the right is instead of going into that meeting room, just keep going straight. And there's some stairs and then you go up. That's where all your stacks are. That's where that is. And that hallway connects to the Supreme Court for that. So next time you're over there, if you're interested, just go up those stairs, take a little walk back there. That's the stack area that we talk about.
And there's even a set of stairs built into the stacks to get your way up. And there's a dumbbell that still works. If you are up there, there's light switches so that each row actually turns on. And I believe there's still books there that are,
Yeah, I
we
think
need to get rid of, so feel free to take one or.
New York Times back to World War I on microfilm.
Right. Shall we deliver? Moving on, to Montpelier, 120 State Street. It's a steam lines and interior renovation. That building was built in the 41, I believe, and when they did that, the steam runs through the outside wall, up the wall, and then into the floor, back around the floor to the wall to the radiator that is hung on the floor. Yes, the condensate lines are also in the outside wall. They actually, when they constructed it, there's a little U shape in the wall that handles these pipes, but it's behind the plaster. And we have had some leaks in there that we have found and repaired. We just don't know if there are still leaks in the walls. And it's just a matter of time that we're gonna have a catastrophic event that we have to jack up the slab or do something in order to get to the steam lines to plug them and then put in new radiators.
that's the DMV building
That is
across the street.
like one across the road.
And that's where the public goes, not to the whole building, but
Right, the DMV's public area is mainly on the first floor. There's some action on the second floor. That is it.
Gina?
Yeah, when you said plaster, you're not talking about like plaster.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
So, plaster and lath.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is on terracotta block.
Ooh.
Yes, 133 State Street was like that, and in 2000 to 2005, we renovated that building and replastered and everything else. And that was when tax was over in the pavilion and they swapped over here. So we did a swap and renovated back and forth for quite a few years.
Troy?
Just curious how many folks are still doing plaster?
There are several out there. They're more in the Boston area, but there's 2 firms, I believe.
Oh,
I'm still doing plaster.
Yeah, there you go.
Not on that scale though.
So that, when we do that, right now, DMV over the years has had some funding that has allowed them to put some air conditioning in on the first 2 floors. They've also got a server over there. The upper floors are window units going. So what this will do is a new HVAC system to go in there that'll provide fresh air and get rid of the units that are feeding the first 2 floors, and there's a portion in the basement, and upgrade that whole system. Unfortunately, when doing that though, everybody who's sitting in there has to vacate. And we'll be taking the ceilings down, putting them back up to be putting all this ductwork in. In the 84, I believe, we did a whole new electrical service in there and upgraded all the lighting. So that lighting's from 84, and all the electrical that, how it's fed, has to be taken out. Including the service that doesn't need code anymore. So that's what that project is about. There will be an air handler sitting on the roof, so the rooftop the view will change a little bit.
The what will change a
The
little?
view when you're
The
looking
view
at,
from
right now
here?
you see the grade bump out for the elevator building, where the controls are, and something else will take place a little bit more to hide the HVAC equipment that will.
And for that particular building, I think it's really important for the visual aspect because it is sort of connected to the State House. I mean, when you come down State Street, that's really what you see. It's the State House and 120 State Street. Those are the 2 biggest buildings. The other buildings are there, but you don't really focus on it. And the public goes into this building.
That project was actually started before World War II and delayed by the war, so it's a 1930s design by Freeman, French and Freeman.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? Freeman, French and Freeman did the Waterbury complex, and Freeman, French and Freeman has been involved with our HVAC. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Waterbury complex was a lot better looking than the DMV building.
Well, it's later.
Yeah, well.
Well, the Freeman, French and Freeman did the rebuild for us.
Oh, really?
The original,
Oh, yeah?
not the original. Gina?
$500,000 doesn't sound like enough for.
Oh, we've put in, it's coming.
Yeah.
And we've put in more money in
So there's more back-
previous.
yeah.
This is phased in. It's not all at once. It's
Yeah.
phased in.
Yeah,
So this is more of a spend as we go plan because of, you can only bank so much money. You're not gonna spend, so you're not doing other projects, so this is, that's why some of the numbers are a little low. State House HVAC renovations, boy, I'd love to skip this one.
So would we.
Another time. I discussed the whole mold issue earlier in the week, and what this is doing now is additional funds in there to get that done and in place. So when we're all said and done, we will have new air handling units in the building, dehumidification, so that we don't have a mold problem in the future, and we'll be able to wring out that moisture. We'll have a better idea of operating as not only a museum, but also for the legislature in their office.
So what's the cost that we, to date? I mean, there's 2.5 and we've put in previous appropriations.
Yes,
Do you
I
have
don't
the
recall.
number? I don't either. Are we at 13 million for the whole project? Are we something like that?
I don't want to say.
I can't remember.
I get that for you.
Yeah. It's not cheap.
It is not. And it's still, as, for those who went on the tour and whatnot, we're still working on what we're going to do for a heat source. So there's 3 options on the table for that. And I'll have those probably by the time when we come to present. I will have that information.
By the time the budget's presented.
Multimodal garage in Rutland. This is yet another garage, but our last garage. With a rear parking structure. Again, similar to 108 32 Cherry Street. It was constructed in 1998. It's not like 32 or 108. 32 Cherry Street and 108 are below ground structures that are not really open to the air. This one is open to the air. But it also has another component that is different than the other two, is that it's open to the public. It's operated by a separate entity. It also has a bus station in it. So the bus service runs through there. It's not as bad as 108 and 32, but it's starting to see some issues, and we do want to jump on it sooner than later.
did the buses fit through it?
Yes. It was designed for that. Now,
It's not a very active
inherited.
Well, the Montpelier one, the buses don't fit through.
They don't fit.
No, the big buses don't fit through there.
The
Well, I was
MCI.
on-
It's new construction.
I was on transportation and they put the entrance backwards when they built it in. And that was.
That's right, they did.
Right, yeah, that was mess, that's why they punted it to the.
Knuckleheads on that council?
What's on that council, knuckleheads?
I'll take care of that later, man.
That went out to the world. Well, that's why the buses fit, they can hit their head on it. Oh, God.
Tear out of the tires.
Yeah, oh, my God. Things that you learn. Okay, next.
Statewide 3-acre stormwater planning and design implementation. Again, there's no funding that you see there because that was ARPA funds. But we got $600,000 in ARPA money, and we are going after bid. We have our proposal together. It should be on the street soon for design. But some of that stuff that we have to do is here in Montpelier, the whole complex is not in under the 3-acre parcel because some of our parcels are individual. The worst one that we have really is over at our 10 Taylor parking lot, and where our maintenance shop is, that parking lot there, and we know that there is some ledge, there's gravel, and that's going to be difficult how to separate the storm water from some of it's just running now straight into the river. So we have 7 or 8 sites that we have to tackle.
So these are for, just to educate the community, these are for parcels that are up to 3 acres? Or 3 acres or more?
3 acres or more.
Over 3 acres or more. And a lot of these are parking lots, and it's stormwater drainage. And this is part of our Clean Water Act that we did 8-10 years ago. That we put in place a 3-acre stormwater a 3-acre parcel stormwater program, and rules had to be developed, and those rules were developed a couple of years ago. Now it's time to implement them. So we're seeing this in BGS. We're also seeing it in forests and parks for that, Agency of Natural Resources. And there may be some other places that kind of percolate up as we start unrolling the 3-acre parcel lot regulations. Practice.
So this was a Vermont Clean Water.
Yes. That's why we have the section of the 11 million in our bill for clean water projects. That was a result of our Clean Water Act to meet the total maximum daily load, the TMDL agreement with with the feds, with Lake Champlain, and Lake Memphremagog. It's all connected. Eric?
Joe, am I right that, like, for instance, for the parking lot over at Taylor, we're gonna have to dig it up and build underground vaults to catch the water? Like, it's some pretty heroic engineering that's gonna have to happen.
That is what I believe is gonna have to be done.
It's highly disruptive and complicated work. That's why it's so much money.
Gina?
And there's also included in that the State House Supreme Court 109, so.
And how does that all work out with the city of Montpelier?
Some of it does go into their drainage system, but other than that, I think it's just on us as the property owner for our area.
Yeah.
But I know it won't be interacting with them.
Wayne?
So these vaults, you're talking about essentially settling ponds, what they are.
Well, in a way, but underground, but it's an arch structure that sits on top of gravel, so.
That's the purpose.
Yes, it is, yep, percolating through.
The driveway.
Yes, we do have that down at the Department of Labor parking lot. If you drive through there, the section that's between the building and the island, that has vaults underneath it. We did that several years ago.
Then you're gonna have to maintain those.
Yes.
What's the water table?
Depends on, well, right now it's a little bit higher. The river's right there. We did not, strangely though, the way the water table flows, just because the river's there doesn't mean we hit it. When we had to drill soil anchors for the heat plant, we did not hit water. And we went 10, 12 feet down. So that was in the lower level of it, which was already about 15, 20 feet down. So. Statewide correctional facility door control system. What this funding is for is to continue our door control system. So the other day we were talking about what we're doing down at Southern State Correctional Facility. This one here is funding to start the next building, which is 2 complexes actually, is St. Johnsbury Correctional Facility, Northeast Regional Correctional Facility, St. Johnsbury, along with the Caledonia Community Work Camp up there. And again, because that building is very similar, almost identical to the one in Rutland, we basically will have that design complete at the same time. We are working with Department of Corrections as to who's up next after St. Johnsbury. It could be Rutland, or it could be St. Albans. We don't know.
And Gina?
Is the door control system so important to replace when you're thinking about building a new facility? I mean, I know it's only in the millions of dollars, not the tens of millions of dollars, but.
It's a tough call, because if it doesn't work, out they go. So what happens right now with the door control system that they have when it fails, they go to keys. So the only way to come and go is through keys. In the facilities that have completely locked doors, where the inmates have to be buzzed out, so incarcerated individuals now, the officer has to go over and unlock them, and then they go to the restroom if need be, or out to the yard or whatever else. The ones who do have the toilet inside the cell, that's not a problem. It is very difficult, especially even in an emergency situation, where you can't just hit a button and all the cells open up and everybody's free to go to the fire exit.
Was part of the DOJ compliance stuff?
No, DOJ compliance was for ADA only.
stuff, okay.
So that's the balance we have to discuss here in the committee when we're looking at the women's facility. If it comes in that it's a part of a bigger 10-year plan or 20-year plan, that's what we're gonna have to balance. Because we've got to figure out, are we gonna be closing some of the male facilities and doing a facility to encompass those beds? That's the balancing act that we do.
And then to one good example along those lines that we had to balance is the Chittenden Correctional Facility. We know that it probably will go away. It's outdated, but we just put a new roof on it.
Because they're gonna be there for 4 or 5 more years.
Exactly. We didn't go through and comply with today's energy code and stack on additional insulation. We actually removed the ballast, cut the membrane so any moisture can translate through, and put a new membrane on top of that. That was to save money, knowing that the potential is to get rid of it in the future. If there's a massive renovation to the place because it's deemed salvageable, then we would go through because of the energy updates that we'd be making. We'd be putting a new roof on. On a skip, Windsor State Property Demolition and Salvage.
Have you taken down the fence yet?
We have not.
It's a razor wire fence.
Well, it's some like it, some do not. Last time we were walking through with the people from who would be operating Newberry, who potentially could be operating a DCF facility that we were looking at.
They want the
there.
fence.
They want the fence, but not the razor ribbon, or maybe one row of razor ribbon. So we haven't done any removal of that yet. However, we have done is also looked at the buildings that we've had, and we've gone out and done a lead and asbestos study. And we're just completing that now as to where there is. So some of the buildings that probably should come down, no matter who uses it or for sale, we could tackle that along with a fence. We just need to know more about what's going to happen to that place, if anything. Because DCF was looking at it for a temporary facility.
So this brings to mind, we had a committee member that was really good with his computer and could bring up these Google Maps so that you could see the property. Is there anyone here in this committee that can do that? Because he's no longer with us.
Yeah.
Troy? I figured Troy could. That's very important as we start looking at some of these items. I know, but for us as a for us as a committee to project it onto the screen. Quite often we do this when we're talking about some of the facilities just so that the committee can visualize what it is. And Windsor is a real important one to do that. It was Kurt Taylor that always did it, and we'd project it up onto the screen for that. So Troy, you're going to be the designated person. Now,
What's the address?
State Farm Road. I don't know the number.
Not a lot of good.
there's not very many pictures.
If you just Google Windsor Correctional Facility, it'll come up. I have the H804 report
There it is.
here that has photos and a aerial shot. And all that, but maybe that's for another day.
Yeah, but if people are interested, when we're talking about a building or talking about someplace, say, hey, I'd like to see this, and, you know, because it does help to kind of comprehend it. Like if you're looking at the courthouse in Newport, if we get into that and you see how it's laid out versus that pit next door, visually it kind of helps to see what we're really talking about. That. So Troy, you're going to be designated doing that and work with people.
Can I air share?
You can share.
I think.
I'm not gonna do it right now, but we can play around some, like in the morning.
See, I just made the room a co-host. Does that now allow you to share your screen?
Why don't you try it, Troy?
That would be from here. So probably
Failing already. We lost Kurt.
I think we just don't know how to do it.
Okay, let me play around next week.
Oh, can I do it?
Now you're the Google guy and repo.
All right.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. I don't want to spend more time, but this is really helpful because, you know, we're going to start talking maybe about St. Albans for some temporary things. We may end up talking about Windsor. We just don't know. I just want to, and it would be good also to see the Chittenden facility, where it is. Some of us know visually what it's like, others don't. And so we'll fix that up.
We also have, for future use by the committee, we have a ArcGIS map that it shows all of our buildings. You can click on the building and it'll tell you everything that's in the space book, what agency's in there, how many people are there, you know, all of our basic data set.
It's too much information.
All right, I'll just sit here and look.
Well, some people will do this. Some people will do this, which is good. It's really great.
So what's that listed as?
I don't have the bandwidth to do it.
It's bgsvtmaps.arcgis.com. I'll share it another time. It's complicated.
Gina, Wayne?
So that's a state-owned solar farm that's next to it?
A state-owned what?
Solar farm that's next to the Windsor?
We did that, right?
Yes, we benefit from it, but I believe we did not install it, we don't own it.
We originally
It's
wanted
like a
to.
lease or something.
Right.
There's something
I think it's a
along
lease.
that, yeah.
And in 20 years, we can buy it for what it's worth.
If we still own the land.
We have one in Windsor, we have one in Springfield, we have one in St. Albans
Yeah.
at the correctional facilities.
Wayne?
I think A&R also has on their website a mapping program that shows all property boundaries and everything.
Good. Okay, let's keep going so we can finish up here.
And last of section 2 is Auxiliary 133 State Street, renovations for ledge IT and shared common space. And what that is the first floor is known as the old server room. When the Agency of Digital Services was there, they used to have that as a server room before they went to National Life. Now they're somewhat out in the cloud. So that space there has two servers for ADS still remaining and will remain there. And the reason being is that is our hub, or their hub for all of GovNetwork coming in and going out of the building. And so as you enter in from the front of the building and work your way down the hallway, the IT area will be on the right-hand side for Ledge IT, their office space, their workspace, and the likes of that. At the end of the hall, there'll be a small area on the left-hand side that is a conference room and Ledge IT server room. So we're in the design of that has started and stopped over the years as to who's going in there. Originally, it was ADS who's going to use it for open office. They used to all the server stuff, putting it in the HVAC and just carpet and furniture. But now we have walls and everything else. The remaining portion of that is going to be unassigned space at this point in time. But to find a home for somebody. That's section 2.
Mm-hmm. Good place to stop.
Okay.
Unless people want to keep moving. We can continue this at some point, but I think, we've gotten the breakdown of the secure residential, the women's facility. We're going to be doing a deeper dive. We've gotten a little bit of a breakdown on that, but we're going to do a little deeper dive of that because that will be ongoing. And then the Williston's Barracks, that is under your jurisdiction as well.
Jonathan right here could give you a quick update on that because.
Why don't you do that, Jonathan? We're going to be visiting that on Wednesdays, so.
Great. Jonathan Griffin from BGS. Love to know what time you guys want to come so I can coordinate and we can give you guys a tour around.
Well, we got to talk about this before we finish up today because we do have to coordinate.
So, project's moving well right now. The team is preparing for the final raised deck on Monday, the first raised deck on Monday. All the slab pours have been poured on the first grade except for one, which will be in the new public service pitch report, you said? And then all the concrete walls have been poured, the steel frame for the garage is up, and the roofing is starting to go on now. Framers are on site starting to close in the building, and progress is going really, really well at this point in time. There was one small delay with a monopole, which is the basically the radio tower that's used for communication. Some issues with communication that had resolved during design. We got to the site, we saw that subsurface conditions were different than expected. But that has stayed moving, and everybody's been working together. Currently, the geothermal installation is underway. They're halfway done with the installation of the geothermal well. And that was a very unique geology of this site. The wells were supposed to be 500 feet deep. And when they got to 490 feet, there was like almost a void in the substructure. And there were some issues with getting to the full design depth. So there was also another issue at 270 feet. It went from solid rock through some till and sand, then back to solid rock again. Very strange. So the geothermal had to be redesigned to make them shallower. So instead of being 500 feet deep, they're now 250 feet deep, which means we had to double the number of wells installed to get the same amount of linear footage of pipe to basically conduct the heat transfer. So that's all going on right now. They're not drilling currently, they're just grouting wells at this point in time, but you'll get to see all of that. And it's a very busy site. I would recommend wearing the best shoes you have because the site is a little slippery. That warm weather we've had has kind of warmed things up and then it's cooled off. And
Wear your boots. Wear your boots.
And we'll do our best to get you parked as close to where you want to be when we get you there. But it's an exciting project, it's going very well, and that all parties are bringing their A team.
So dress accordingly. You're going to be outside, basically.
Yes, it'll be partially heated when we go into one of the software areas, but plan on unheated. You know, if it's a cold day, definitely dress warmly.
So that leads into our discussion for our field trip. We have to organize some things today. One is we really have to figure out food, so I hope I'm gonna be here, and Phil, please come so we can submit this to the cafeteria. Tell us what you would like for lunch, please, because then Phil and I can get that to the cafeteria folks today. They really wanted it today, not wait till Tuesday. So if you can do that before you head out the door for lunch, would be great, because we're not gonna come back as a committee. The second thing, we can do this on Tuesday, but we need to figure out what time do we want to leave so that it helps these folks. Do we want to leave at 8:00? Do we want to leave at 8:30?
Tuesday.
Wednesday. It would be Wednesday. 8:30? 8:00? 8:00.
Where are you going Thursday?
I'm thinking, because you're coming from the north. Wayne, are you staying over?
I'll be staying over.
Who is coming from the north? Just you.
I'll meet you, I can meet, I mean, it's a circular drive. I'll meet you wherever you are.
Okay.
I just need to know what was here.
It'd be good, better. Which one comes sooner, Williston or Essex? I'm not that familiar.
You'll probably do Williston, Essex, then Berkeley.
So let's do Williston first. So if we left here, is 8:00 too soon for you? Eric, you commute up from Rutland.
Actually, it would be easier for me to read in Williston or Essex, because it'd be kind of the same distance.
So you don't have to come to Montpelier.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can go up Route 7.
Yeah, just go shoot right over 7.
Okay, so we've got 2 people. So we have 10 folks for riding. You're coming with us, Phil, right? Yeah, so there's 12 of us, so 2 of you. You're gonna bring your own lunch?
Yeah.
Okay, and you're bringing your own lunch? Okay, so there's 10 of us who will have to submit what we want for lunch unless some people want to bring their own lunch. So what time do people want to meet in the State House to leave? 8:30? 8:00? Is that what I'm hearing?
It's fine with me.
Sure.
What time will we be getting back?
I don't think we'll get back much before 3 or 4, is my thinking.
Would it be possible to add the Chittenden Regional in the day and make it 4?
That's gonna be logistically tough, because you have to work with DOC and security. on that one. We can drive by it, but to get in it, that's gonna be a much heavier lift.
It's a women's facility.
Yeah, when you work with correctional facilities, it's a much heavier lift to get in there. That has to be planned pretty well in advance. And we also,
We're carpooling, I assume?
that's the other thing. So I'm trying to figure out the time. So 8 o'clock, we're gonna meet. Let's meet in the coat room at 8 o'clock.
Okay, where?
The coat room.
And that's the one downstairs.
This says it'll be cloudy.
Yeah, the weather so far is holding off.
Yeah.
It's really
High
bad
30,
weather.
low 25.
So if we left here, we probably wouldn't get in the cars and get out of here much before 8:15 or so.
Mhm.
You're saying dress fairly casual.
I'm wearing pants. Never see me in pants.
Casual.
Yeah. I'm wearing pants. You never see me with pants in the state house.
Notice.
Yeah, I don't.
It's cool.
So, and good shoes, coats, because you also get hard hats when you're there for that.
For hard heads.
So we'll go to Williston first. I don't know, secure residential next and then the parking garage, or go reverse?
I do the parking garage and then do the secure residential last, because, you know, hang
Okay.
out there and road through the place.
Okay. So then we need transportation. So we're gonna have 3 cars. We're gonna need 3 cars, I would assume. There's 10 of us. 2 cars at 5, 3 cars. So think about that for folks over the weekend. We can figure that out on Tuesday. Lunch, gonna need to know what you want for lunch. If you're bringing lunch yourself, at least let us know that you're bringing lunch. And if you're not if you're not bringing lunch, you want a sandwich, not a wrap?
Yes.
Okay. Let us know, either way, because I don't want to have to track you down and say, what do you want for lunch? Okay? And Tuesday, evacuation. There's some things that Phil needs, and we need to have a conversation on what we're going to be doing for evacuation on Tuesday afternoon.
Can I just clarify one more thing about Wednesday? We're not coming back to be on floor?
No, we've gotten the okay.
Okay.
Today I expected the bill for the town meeting thing to come up. Did that come up at all? I wasn't on the floor.
No. Because that's got a time deadline.
Well, if they bring it up Tuesday, we can suspend rules and put it
Yeah.
through.
We're gonna have to.
I got the approval. We can double check on Tuesday. We can double check, but we got the approval. I'm not anticipating coming back. We may get back here at 3:30,
Yeah.
but the floor is at 3.
Yeah, and we're gonna linger.
We're gonna linger, and we gotta find a place to eat. And it's a good time to bond as a, figure out how we're doing as a committee too. So evacuation.
Yeah, all I need to know at this point is, do I have a cell phone number for all of the committee members? If you put a cell phone number on that contact chart that I sent to you, then we're fine. The second thing I need to know is which evacuation route this group of people wishes to use. Do you feel comfortable using the metal fire escape?
Yeah.
Or you can go down the set of stairs that are just outside the card room. So you decide. Do you want to go out the fire escape?
I've had to do that every time in the past from the 3rd floor, yeah.
Don't wear heels.
No.
And Mary, you are going to go to the elevator.
Elevator, I guess.
Okay. So I hope that we all go out together and that no one lingers so that I can keep track of everyone. And then the next decision that the group needs to make is we will be dumped out in this parking lot out here. The default area for us to all gather is over in 109. The chief led me to believe that we could choose a different place. I don't know if it would be acceptable to the people in the Pink Lady, but at least for Tuesday, I'd sort of like for us, depending on the weather, to either use their porch or go into their front entrance. And don't tell anybody else because.
Well, it's all on YouTube.
Well, I forgot.
But how many people are watching? Could be just one.
So if we can all agree for at least Tuesday for that to be our evacuation site, then I can let Peggy and Mike know that you're all accounted for.
Mhm.
And it then would allow us to come back into the building quicker because we have witnesses on Tuesday, and getting us all back here from 109 rather than wait, it probably is going to take them at least a half an hour.
At least.
So we can come back really quickly. I think that's all I need to know.
Oh, yeah.
So let's go to the Pink Lady. Yeah.
Okay, yep.
Because we're gonna have a person from Council of State Governments. Thank you. Yeah.
Take care. Have a good week.
We don't know what time the evacuation drill is gonna happen, but at 1:00, we have someone, 1:00 or 12:30?
1:00.
1:00, we have someone from Council of State Governments zooming in to talk to us about Justice Reinvestment too, and his schedule is we're lucky we can get him on such short notice. So we don't know when the drill's gonna happen for that. Get your cell number to Phil, he doesn't have it, and dress comfortably for Tuesday and Wednesday. And I think that's it for us. And
That's it for today?
I think so, unless people want to come back and work this afternoon.
Well, you said dress comfortably for Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday,
No, just one.
just Wednesday, I thought I heard, okay, Wednesday's
Well,
the tour.
Tuesday, for women, you need to dress a little bit different if you wear heels.
Oh, right, for the, yes, thank you.
For the fire drill.
Fire escape.
For the fire escape. And if you're afraid of heights, the fire escape is not the place to go.
Just a quick question, but we saw it up on
So
Wednesday. I'm going straight to Williston, Essex, or
Willis.
Williston.
So we're done on YouTube for the day, so let's sign off.